Welcome to the So Tell Me podcast, where I talk with fascinating professionals about the work that they do. I am Dr. Melissa Deuter, and today I'll be talking with Robert Saenz about his work as a former federal agent, a VIP medical consultant, and most recently, a podcaster with the Texas Examiner. This podcast is sponsored by Sigma Mental Health Urgent Care, located in San Antonio and Austin, Texas. Okay, so I am here today with Mr. Robert Saenz, who I'm going to start by saying how I know you. Okay, and it's complicated, and this is part of the reason I wanted you to be on this podcast, because your career is a complicated link of things. So I first met you when you were working, running a music venue with your family.
Yes.
And so the music venue, you have artists local and national, and I would come to the music venue. So I was introduced to you by Stephen Oxher, actually.
That's correct.
And then he recommended that I come to you as a medical consultant. So you were working with VIP medical consulting.
Right.
When I had come to him with some specific questions about things I might want to do in my practice. And so, but then most recently, you're doing this Texas Examiner, which is basically some kind of news program. I don't know, but I was a guest on
Right.
on that as
Great
well.
guest, by the way. People are still talking about that show.
Well, cool. And so it's interesting though, because these things seem all disconnected. And I know that you were Border Patrol.
Mhm.
And then you have, so you're Border Patrol, and then you're a medical consultant, and then you have a music venue, and then you're doing political news.
Yes, you missed a little piece there. I worked for a congressman for a while too.
And you work for Congress?
Yes.
So anyway, I know you because you've been of service to, to my business, making recommendations and things like that. And you've been a friend, and you have a very lovely wife. I don't know why someone so sweet is married to such a character,
We all make mistakes and carry our cross. That was her mistake.
Well, why don't you tell me how you came to do all these things? Start at the beginning, or the starting point.
Well, growing up in Laredo, Texas, and really literally in the body of Laredo, Texas, you don't have a lot of options, other than my dad was in the railroad, and I thought of the railroad. My dad said no to too much work. It's heavy work. So law enforcement was another one. And I had an older brother that was in the Border Patrol that I looked up to, or I still do. And that seemed to be my mission, to be a Border Patrol agent. When I went to see him graduate when I was 12 years old at the Border Patrol Academy, and it left a lasting impression.
So for people who are not from here,
yes,
talk about Laredo and the Texas border.
Oh, that's right. You have viewers from all over the place.
Yeah.
Well, Laredo, Texas is, we're in San Antonio here, so it's about 150 miles south of here, right on the Mexican border.
Mm-hmm.
And if you understand the culture down in the border, especially Laredo, it's kind of seamless. People that on the U.S. side, we tend to speak Spanglish. We speak, you'll go through a drive-through and order in English and the Lancer in Spanish, and vice versa. It's a different culture.
The city spans both sides of the border.
Yes, Laredo and Nuevo Laredo, which means a new Laredo, and so you have families on both sides, and a lot of people, and and then you have this tension also, where you have immigration, illegal immigration. You have drugs coming across, and it's just it's an interesting dynamic. It's not like living in San Antonio or Houston or Nebraska.
Right.
And so you learn to
adapt. San Antonio is the closest, major city, right? But it's still different, right? You get a few hours in.
Yes.
Yeah. It's just a different dynamic. The people who are here are really embedded and rooted in here more, and working families and stuff like that. But you're not right there on the border.
Right.
So
Yeah. So it was different. We would go shopping across the border and for certain things, and my mom would shop for other things on the U.S. side. It was kind of interesting. But that was, of course, back a long time ago in the 60s, before the drug wars of today. Now it's a little dangerous to just meander across the.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, so it's changed. I mean, it was really much more of a dynamic back and forth. And now it's more regulated, it's more
Right.
closed up. You don't just go across, you go through the checkpoint. They're very, very meticulous about.
Absolutely. It's a different world. It's become a more dangerous area the border has. And however, you got to be careful what you hear in the media too, because you hear about this crisis and this invasion, and it's become so political on both sides of the spectrum. Which when I was in the Border Patrol, we never got any attention. We didn't get any resources, and now it's the hot topic. And depending on what side of the political arena you are, it's not all reality what you hear in the news.
Right. I saw something, you actually may have shared it, where there were some people who went down to the border to see.
Yes.
And then they were interviewed and they said, well, this isn't what I expected.
Exactly.
And then, well, in what way is this not what you expected? And they said, well, it's not as bad.
Right.
It's not as dramatic as what I was picturing. It's just,
Right. And it does. In fairness, though, sometimes you do get these invasions. I worked for 20 some years in the Border Patrol in different capacities. And I remember I experienced the Mariel boat lift when Fidel Castro, president of Cuba, released all the prisoners and the mentally insane, and they were coming across by Key West, Florida, and we were having to receive them because we couldn't just deport them to Cuba.
And they're coming to the US for the promise of a better life in the US. Like these are displaced people and they want to come here because if they can get in, they believe this is going to be the best place.
Yeah, most people, that's correct. In the case of the Mariel's boat lift, that wasn't necessarily the case. He was releasing these people, but my point was at that point, I guess you could call it an invasion. They were just literally dumping them on us. And then I experienced when the Haitians were fleeing, also for reasons that their country was falling apart at the time. And then we had the Salvadorians and the Nicaraguans during the Iran-Contra deal. I've seen different ebbs and flows of different nationalities come in massive flows, and then it stops. In fact, in my heyday, 80s and 90s, the Mexican nationals were the ones that were coming across more. And we had a terminology for anybody else that wasn't Mexican. And when we'd arrest them, we'd call them OTMs, other than Mexican, because that's how we would process. Now it's a different world. You have Venezuelans, you have Central South America, you have people from China. I mean, the whole gamut now for the Border Patrol down on the border. So it is a different dynamic, but.
And then I add briefly, because we could do a whole deep dive here, but then there are international laws that apply, right? That, we can't just say, well, too bad, right? We have rules that we have to follow with regard to how we treat these people who show up at our border.
Yes.
And so there are complexities of that are not just do what we want, right? It's not like grandpa on his land with a shotgun saying, get off my lawn.
That's right.
We can't just let people drown. We can't just.
There's a humanitarian aspect of it too. And I struggled with that a lot. Like I said, we get into a whole show about that, but I struggled with you're arresting people in 1 minute that are drug smugglers or a criminal element, and the next minute you're saving a woman and her child that are drowning in the river.
Right, and you got to do both things. I mean, that law enforcement is like that. That on the one hand, you have to be prepared to deal with bad people, but on the other hand, you can't be treating good people like bad people, and you've got to help the good people. And I think that's where some of the law enforcement issues,
Yes, I'm not sure you deal with it because it's coming at you fast, and it's an emotional roller coaster in an 8-hour period. You have moments of just boredom to minutes of sheer terror, and it's up and down like that. So it can mess with a person pretty bad, and then that carries on to the family, and as you know better than I do.
And I deal with officers and first responders of all kinds in terms of their mental health, right? So somebody shows up and says, I'm just suddenly, after a 20-year career, I'm having a hard time coping every day. I'm not sleeping. I'm anxious all the time. I'm drinking. So you get those kinds of responses.
Right. But I think it's changing. I grew up in the macho culture of law enforcement, and I think now it's changing slowly. You're seeing that men and women in law enforcement are a little more open to talk about their feelings. You know, when I did that in the 80s, oh my gosh, you were blackballed and, called weak.
Right, right.
So there's a lot of stuff you hold in.
Yeah, I think there is, and there's a lot more training for
Yes.
people to take better care of themselves and go and speak with a counseling professional and stuff like that.
Sure.
Okay, so Border Patrol.
Put
And
that
then,
in our past.
and then somehow, and so then what's the evolution from there? First you're in Border Patrol, and then what happens after that?
Well, Border Patrol is a little more complex than just agents of the border. I became an intelligence officer, so I started doing undercover work, which I really enjoyed. Then I transferred over to investigations, which is now ICE, and I was a special agent. Went to the FBI National Academy, went to Washington D.C. So my career started to evolve, and I was learning a lot thanks to the Department of Justice. And I think when I went to DC, it opened up my eyes that there was a bigger world out there in law enforcement. And so at that point, I was having to deal with Congress a little bit more and learn about the intricacies of the political arena, how it affected us with resources, et cetera, policies. And I came back to El Paso, Texas, and I worked for a man named Sylvester Reyes, who was a very popular chief of the Border Patrol. In fact, in 1994, he and I were the first ones to erect the first wall, if you may, on the border. But it was a strategic thing. We erected a landing mat that was used in the Vietnam era for choppers to land. It was steel panels, and we put them along the border in Anapra, New Mexico, which is there's no river there.
Okay.
And what was happening is it was a freight train. The railroad would come through there about 10 yards from the actual border. And bandits from the Mexican side would come across, lay debris on the tracks, force the train to stop, and then they literally jump on there in masses and rob the traders.
Wow.
And take TVs.
And what year is this?
This is in 1994.
Okay.
And so we said there was no way to defend it, so we put this 1.5 mile long landing mat, and what it did is it protected the railroad at that area, and
they got to go a long way around.
So it stopped it. And however, then there was a consequence about that too. The people that would normally cross through there now had to go out in the desert a little further out, and people were dying.
Okay.
And
then we come back to this bad people, good people, right?
Yes.
You're trying to take care of the good people.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so it's but I think that's where the concept of the wall started. Yes, it works in
You built the wall. You the wall, the original wall.
Yes, but it's a strategic tool. It's just like cameras. You have cameras in certain areas. You have the ground sensor,
right?
But putting a wall all across the border is just not reality. And the
river and the landscape,
environment, and the unintended consequence was the Border Patrol agents were really upset at us because now they had to sit there and protect the wall, because when we weren't there, the people from the other side were coming across and with torches cutting pieces off to take it to build homes. And so
oh my God!
It was
materials.
It's an endless struggle. So anyway, from the Border Patrol, that chief patrol agent became so popular because of our strategy. He ran for Congress, got elected. A few years afterwards, he asked me to come over and join him. He needed someone that he could trust to be loyal, and I went to Congress and worked for him for a couple of years, and that opened up my eyes.
And then what did you do there?
Well, everything, and that's what opened up my eyes. Growing up in Laredo again, where you think everything is just black and white, now I'm dealing with social security issues, military issues, veterans issues, local constituent issues, water, international commerce, trade. I was getting hit with everything. And as a representative of the congressman, you had to learn all this and be able to articulate it, and also help constituents that needed help. I like that the most. When
like taking a call and trying
somebody's dad called that he didn't get his social security benefits or veterans benefits, and you could call from the congressman's office and get things done. That was the fun part. And so
and I just want to I want to ask you something here, because again, I think people don't know, but so you were working for a Democrat.
Oh yes.
And I think that's important, because here you are, law enforcement. There's this perception that I think is just kind of interesting, that people who are pro law enforcement, pro military, that they have to belong to the Republican Party.
Right.
But that there are lots of pro law enforcement, pro military, folks.
Sure.
On both sides.
Yeah, and part of the reason too this is El Paso, Texas, where he ran for Congress. You can't get elected as a Republican anyway. So and also the congressman was from there. So and again, it's a conflicting, it's a tug of war, because he is he went to the Vietnam War. He was a war hero. He was a migrant worker.
Yeah.
He had a very interesting life, and so he could see both sides of it. He could see the struggles.
But I think most Americans are like that.
Yeah,
I
you're right.
don't think most Americans are this black and white, it's one way or the other way. I think most people, because I talk to people, it's what I do for a living, right?
Sure.
And people are nuanced, and there are subtleties about it. But when you think about it in theory, you think a certain kind of person,
Right?
And then in reality, there's a lot more to it than that.
Well, and it's interesting, Dr. Deuter, is I just got asked this question 2 weeks ago. And we'll get to the podcast that I have, but I started this podcast recently. So I went to a Democratic rally, and then I went to a Republican rally. One night after the other, and this is in my community, and people are looking at me like, okay. And some guy finally came up to me in the Republican rally and says, I realize you're doing a story here, but what are you? Are you Republican or Democrat? And I said, I told him, well, what's the issue and who's the person? And it kind of it blew him away. And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, it depends. Sometimes I vote Republican, sometimes I vote Democrat, depending on the issue or the person.
That used to be something people openly would say. That's being an independent, or maybe you belong to a party, but you don't feel in this race, in this moment, that this is,
correct.
Your party line applies. But more and more, there's this kind of tribal identity. I'm really interested in the way people think individually and in groups, right? Why are people like this? And people say, if I'm a member of this group, I have to have this belief.
Right, and they'll accept me or they won't accept me. And it takes guts to get up and say, and what I basically told them at the end was, I refuse to be labeled. And I said, because along my life, as you know, I've done multiple things.
Right.
And I said, my dad used to always say this in Spanish. He said, buen gallo en cualquier gallinero canta, which means a good rooster will crow in any chicken coop.
Yeah.
And he would tell us that to inspire us that don't let people pigeonhole you. You can do any job you want.
Yeah.
And you can switch around.
And apparently that is something you took to heart.
Yes. And so did my dad.
So Border Patrol, and then now we're working for the congressman. Right. And then what happened after that? 9/11 happened.
And it was like kind of like the Godfather movie, just when I was out, they pulled me back in, so I'm assigned to this working group that is traveling around the country. It was a bipartisan group, and meeting with others, Republicans and Democrats, to plan for another catastrophe. So I'm meeting doctors now for the first time, meeting first responders.
Who were you working for at that point?
The congressman still.
Okay.
But I'm part of this working group, and I'm working with other congressmen.
And you're talking about disaster relief.
Exactly.
Which is very medical centric.
Right. And so I'm working with different congressional offices there, and it was good. It made us work together. And the common denominator, the common thing I kept hearing, Dr. Deuter, was when I would meet with doctors, they would say, Robert, so you're a former federal agent. Yeah, well, can you help us? Because when the DEA or FBI come to our office, they come in there guns a-blazing, and they come in with their blue jackets, and and sometimes we don't really know what we're doing wrong.
Yeah.
And when we try to call them to see what's happening after they take our computers and everything, we can't get a hold of anybody, and they just treat us like criminals.
So you're there talking about disaster relief, and people are just pulling you for these side conversations saying,
correct,
I don't know anybody who has that expertise, but I'd really like to talk to somebody who knows about this. Could you help me?
Yes. And so I, as a staffer, I help people. So I would ask him, tell me about your situation. And 9 times out of 10, it was a billing issue, or it was maybe a prescribing issue. Doctors don't typically they don't get into the medical field to break the law.
Right. No, and I think a lot of people don't entirely understand how the typical personality of a physician is a heart for service.
Yes.
In a high intellect person, but really, and the way medical education works for physicians really drives home that that message. And so, yes, you're gonna get bad apples,
Mhm.
but I think honestly, what I see more is physicians being just sort of defenseless. They
Yeah.
don't have this expertise. They're very focused on the biochemistry of how the cell produces
Mhm.
energy and all these, little nuanced things, and not on the business.
Right.
And not even on the law. I mean, we have to pass a jurisprudence exam before we license in the state of
Mhm.
Texas. But I mean, I would say, there's a med school exam and there's a college exam that is just a lot easier. And that jurisprudence exam is one test,
Mhm.
and it's at the college level.
Right.
You study for it for a few hours,
Sure.
you ace the test
Sure.
and move on. You don't understand the law. I think most doctors don't entirely understand.
Yeah, well said. And most lead with their heart. And as a law enforcement officer, I lead with suspicion. I lead with my head thinking, what is this about? And so it's a different mentality. And so I was able to, in numerous cases, help these doctors by simply calling the heads of the DEA or FBI or Medicare, OIG, and I'd say, hey, look, what's the case here? What's the situation here? And I had access.
And you had knowledge of how it worked.
Exactly.
Too,
and
right?
I knew how the process worked. So I was able to resolve a lot of issues for them, so they didn't have to get attorneys and they didn't have to go through all this process. Well, after a while, I had an epiphany, and I thought, wait a minute, this is something I probably do after I retire. And actually, somebody told me to monetize it. Somebody said, you should be a consultant and do this.
Mhm.
And so after,
who told you?
it was actually the CEO of the El Paso Orthopedic Surgery Group, Frank Ritchie, good friend of mine. I went and helped him out and literally saved him millions of dollars.
And he said you should really be getting paid as a consultant.
Yes, yes. And so when the opportunity came, what happened was one of the twists in my river here. When I was working for the congressman, I got assigned to Ron Kirk, the mayor of Dallas at the time, who ran for the U.S. Senate against John Cornyn. And so I went to help him with his campaign. We didn't win, but so after that, I was like, okay, do I go back to the congressman's office or do I retire? And that's when I decided to
know what?
go into consulting.
Okay.
And I said, I'll just do one or two of these cases a year. And it evolved into just a career.
Because a lot of people needed.
Yes.
So it's interesting because when I found you and I come and, work with you as a consultant, I don't need any help with compliance with the law.
Right.
I am very, very particular.
Yes.
I don't like to be out of compliance.
You're like a police officer. You lead like me, like
right.
what am I getting into?
I want to follow the rules. And
Right.
so I think we had a little trouble figuring out the dance of how to work together.
That's
because
true.
what you usually work with people on, I was like, oh no, I'm not doing that.
That's true.
I'm not having those problems. So but it makes sense. And I think people do need the expertise. They lead with their heart. Somebody comes in, they need something from that doctor. They
Right.
say yes to that and some kind of arrangement that's not the way it's supposed to be from a, legal organizational standpoint or whatever. And they're just trying to help somebody out. They're just trying to collaborate. And it turns out, oh, there's a kickback.
Sure.
Type of rule that applies to that relationship or whatever.
Sure. And that's interesting you brought that up, because I think our relationship evolved, our professional relationship evolved where not from compliance, but more on the business development side. You and I started talking about how do we grow your business? Where are we going from here? And over the last 20 years that I've been doing this with VIP Medical, it's gone from compliance to more doctors call me and they go, how do I grow my business? Or how do I sell my business? Or how do I recruit more, physicians? And they trust us because when we're helping them with their business, we're going to do it in a compliant manner. And I still do a lot of public speaking, and in those events, inevitably some doctor comes up to me after the event and says, hey,
can you help me out?
Hey, I got visited, and that usually evolves into, can you help me out with this other business? And am I doing this legally? Or and I find doctors that sometimes are doing something unintentional that's breaking the law, or it could be perceived as breaking the law. And I'll tell them, stop. And their fear is, oh my gosh, I'm going to stop this revenue stream. And I tell them, but here, you can't do that, but let me show you something else we can do.
Yeah,
you can make a lot more money.
You do it this other way.
Right.
Yeah, and so you're right. I look at those moments and I say, something doesn't feel right, I don't,
Too easy.
too easy, that seems shady, that doesn't,
Right.
and I don't know, I mean, for me, it's gotta pass the Brian Deuter test, which is
Sure.
a high standard of
The
ethics
man you
and
go home to
and
at the end of the day,
morality.
yes.
If he would not think that this was above board, then I'm not, I'm not gonna do it.
It's interesting you say that because when I was a young patrol agent, I was offered a bribe by these two Colombians. It was me and another officer at a checkpoint in the middle of nowhere out in the desert. And we caught them. They had 13 pounds of cocaine and they had $500,000 in cash. I was 23 years old.
And they're gonna offer you this.
Brand new. And they're offering me and this other young agent cash to let him go. I said, because they were going to get killed if they didn't deliver the cocaine and the cash was theirs. And I tell you, my ethics, obviously I was trained not to take bribes.
Yes, yes.
We were afraid about internal affairs, but what really kept me grounded, always made me say no to anything like that, was my mother. She's still alive. It was not the fear of her wrath, the fear of embarrassing her and her name. I grew up in a household where, like, don't embarrass us, don't embarrass us,
I think that's what a good morality and people of integrity, they don't want to hurt or disappoint the good people
right
who surround them.
That's it.
And it's interesting because it's not based in fear of punishment.
No,
it's based in love and respect for the other person and their wishes and their needs and what they've given to you.
Yes.
So
it's not often like, oh, these are my morals or my ethics. Sometimes, yeah, that's true, but I think
but I don't want to hurt anybody.
I don't want to hurt somebody.
Yeah, and the people who've loved me so well and been so
yes
good to me and offered me so much. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, so okay, then you're moral and ethical and you know the regulations
right.
And you're out there helping doctors and you're doing this, and then can you just briefly touch on how you go from there to the music venue?
Okay, so so I buy this piece of land from a friend again he's in need, financial need. I don't need this little piece of land that's out in the on a farm road, but I thought, okay, it's an investment, about 20 acres or so, and it was affordable back then. And now I'm like,
what year was that?
This was in
what year was it?
2000. I was about 2010 or so.
Okay.
This is in the hill country. You can't get that kind of land anymore.
Yeah.
And so I thought, okay, but then I'm like, what do I do with this?
Right.
It's here. It's a lot of cars coming through there. And my daughter came up with the idea of, why don't we do a food truck park? Okay. And just rent it out.
And I think I should also just the plug for, this is the Roundup Music Venue.
The Roundup Music Venue.
And it's kind of north of Fair Oaks, right?
Yes, it's in Bergheim, Texas, in Bernie, Texas is the actual address, but it's out in 3351, right? So I thought my daughter is very entrepreneurial, and I said, okay, let's do that. And so we started doing it, and it started as a food truck park. And then she says, well, why don't we have some live music here? Okay, and we do live music, a little stage. And this is all within a year and a half later. It's like, let's do a bigger stage and bring in some regional acts. And then that grew into national acts. Next thing you know, we have, Josh Abbott and Kevin Fowler and Cody Jinks. I mean,
big country
music names, yes.
Yeah. But the most fun for me actually was the Spasmatics coming out, and they would do the event, and it was just so silly and fun. Come out there, or a Halloween event for the kids. They do a hayride,
and that's all because of my daughter, because she thought she was thinking, like a young mother, or like a person that was really in tune with what was happening in the growth of Bernie and the demographic and the music people wanted. In fact, I remember one time telling her, she said, let me bring in Cody Jinks. And I'm like, who's Cody Jinks? And she goes, Dad, he'll be great. And I thought, well, he's very
an up and
expensive.
comer.
Yeah, I said, he's very expensive. And I said, why don't we bring in Mickey Gilley? And she goes, Mickey Gilley, who's Mickey Gilley?
Oh, no.
And that's when I realized I was old.
Yeah, well, I know Mickey Gilley more than I know Cody Jinks. So
when Cody Jinks brought in 5,000 people, Mickey Gilley brought in maybe 300. So she was right. I learned to follow her lead, and so
really it was her.
It's her.
It was Erica.
Yeah, Erica. The only reason we call it the Roundup is there's a love story behind there. my wife Rosalba and I, when we went on our first date, we went in a place in Laredo called the Roundup. And then 3 months later, I proposed to her there.
What kind of place was this?
It's a country music, a little place in Laredo. It's really cool. And I proposed to her there. So when my daughter said, "We want to open up this venue," I said, "Would you just call it the Roundup?" And we did.
That's
and
so
yeah,
cute.
so it has a special meaning. And then we ended up selling it 5 years later. My daughter, we've had 2 grandkids since, and I remember watching my little grandkids run around the music venue the first year or two, and I thought to myself, no, I don't want this. I don't want him growing up here.
Yeah, because a bar in a way.
It's a bar,
People go
and
out to hear music,
yes,
beer.
and you can't watch and I said, no, this is not us. And so we sold it. It was a good for us to sell it, and we sold the land later, and took that headache off of but we built it and we're proud of it. We built it and we turned it over to someone else. And of course I continue with my consulting. My daughter is now working for, a medical company as well, and doing very well. But it was a great experience. I would, the positives of it is you meet a lot of great people. The negatives of it is you meet a lot of bad people, in the bar business and the customer service business, the music business, you meet some wonderful people, but then you also have that underbelly.
Bar business.
Yes.
That sounds terrible. I used to, one of my colleagues used to joke about how, some people, they see the psychiatrist and they want their pills, their Xanax or whatever. And he felt like he might as well be a bartender. He would joke about that. He was going to retire and go practice that form of, psychopharmacology at the beach or whatever. And I mean, yeah, the bar business doesn't sound any more fun than being just a pill pusher.
Right. But I think she wanted to do it. And I've always encouraged my kids, less like my dad, to follow, to take a shot. I had another daughter that wanted to go to LA, and she studied drama and wanted to go into Hollywood. And I was scared, but I was able to, she did it. She got it out of her system. She's now a doctor, so I'm trying to never keep them from pursuing their dreams, and I try to guide them as much as
what
possible.
a wonderful thing y'all built too. You built this really neat place, and I spent a lot of time there.
Thank you.
And it was great fun. And then the person who introduced us,
oh yes, good guy,
is medical
consultant
field related, marketing related, but he has a band. And so that was
That's
actually what drew us out there. It was interesting because their first gig, that was Smoke Wagon. Their first gig was my husband's 40th birthday party.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, I don't know if this is just some like,
Beer
midlife crisis band, because we'd never heard them play.
Oh,
but
I didn't realize.
we had them come out and play, and they were so good. I was blown away.
Smoke Wagon still plays. They're all around. They're awesome.
And then they added Deb and the the fiddle and everything. They're incredibly good. And so that was what was drawing us out there, is every time they'd play, all of us who knew them, we would all come out.
Yeah, in fact, Steve Ochsner and I, the head of the band, we did some business together, and there was some synergies on the medical side. Yeah, outside of there, wonderful guy, and just a good-hearted person. His wife's a psychiatrist.
Yeah, she was my office mate so I've known Audra since we were both in residency. I've known Audra since neither one of us had any kids, and now those kids came and went to college already. So that's how long I've known her. It's interesting, the 6 degrees of separation that people talk about, right? Yeah.
I also met Bill Small one day at the Roundup. He plays with a band, and he's a singer-songwriter, and he kind of long hair, looks like your typical, Wimberley, artist, hippie type guy, and but very, very intelligent. And he tells me one day, he says, "You know what you need? You need a coach." And I'm thinking in the back of my mind, I don't think so. I've had a pretty interesting career. I've been coached by the government. What are you going to do? But he seems like such a nice guy. So I said, okay, let's meet one day. And we sat at a picnic table.
And he's a coach with the kind of hippie energy.
Well, no,
music.
That's what I thought. Yeah. No, he's actually a leadership coach, and he coaches physicians, executives. And it evolved from, when I sat down at the table with him, I was skeptical, being a cop and thinking this is a waste of my time.
You're a skeptical person.
Right. And it all of a sudden it's kind of like talking to Dr. Deuter. I'm like opening up and getting these views that I hadn't seen before about how I can do things better.
Yeah.
Basically getting out of my own way.
Yeah.
And letting life happen and accepting things. And that's what he taught me. And eventually then that relationship turned into where now he works for BIP Medical as a, independent contractor. We use him sometimes to help train staff or physicians. Great guy. He's good at teaching people leadership. And
but you met him through this music.
Met him through the music. I met a lot of great people like yourself as well.
Yeah.
So that is the good thing about a bar or a restaurant is you meet a lot of people.
Meet a lot of good people.
Yes, yeah. A lot of good people, but it's difficult to please 100% of the people 100% of the time.
Right. And I remember you talking to me about that, about people being rude, and yes. I particularly about you getting frustrated with people who were rude to your wife.
Oh,
who's so kind.
Yes.
And so gracious.
Yes.
And like, come on.
That was the hardest part.
Why are you being rude to her of all people? She's just being kind.
I had to remind myself. You have to switch from, okay, I'm the manager here. How would the manager handle it? Not how her husband would handle it.
Right.
Because her husband was not going to handle it very well.
No, but she's very kind, but she was a nurse.
Yes.
Right?
Well, she owned a home health agency.
She owned a home health.
Yeah, she was a social worker.
She was a social worker, but she's not a person who can't hold her own.
No, she's strong.
Yeah, you weren't there when she was off at her work, but she could.
She worked in prison systems, but she's got a way to like you do of disarming people with words and her presence, and and I'm of the mentality I have to disarm them physically.
Yeah, well,
and so that doesn't always work. But
I think also probably that's what she has in her toolbox. Right. She's a small framed, kind-hearted, kind of very feminine woman, and she's not gonna disarm them physically.
Right.
So she's gonna have to disarm them.
True.
Psychologically. True. So music venue.
Right.
And then the most recent thing is the Texas Examiner, and I came on as a guest on which is, I mean, I have to describe. So we're here in my office, and we're very low tech here. That's what I told you.
But look at this beautiful environment.
Yes, beautiful space. But I came into y'all's studio and it was high tech. There were lights and a green screen. It was,
cameras everywhere.
I mean, it was really like the news. You're doing like a news program over there. Yeah. So where the heck did that come from?
Well, first of all that stuff, I got to give credit to my partner and co-host, John Kipton. John's the tech guy who has guided me on how we need to do this right.
Okay.
And we agreed that we were going to do it. We were going to do it, as professional as possible, because we wanted to be not just a podcast, but an investigative podcast that would take on, hard issues that were affecting the local area. And we realized that Bernie, Kendall County specifically, I guess this applies for most small towns. We really don't have a hard-hitting newspaper.
Right.
We really don't have a TV program or a news station. It's only out of San Antonio, and also.
And y'all wanted to be a hard-hitting news station?
Well, I mean, hard-hitting is not it, but we wanted to.
They're on like Facebook, stirring the pot.
We do. We talk about issues that the newspaper wants to talk about the high school volleyball team or the local booster club, and it's all Pleasantville, and we wanted to show the reality. Hey,
you want to talk about how the agencies are spending their money,
right? The
taxpayers' money,
exactly,
and stuff like that.
Yeah,
that people may not know
exactly, and there's a lot of waste, fraud, and abuse, and I think a lot of these people would hide underground and just get away with. They've been getting away with a lot of stuff because of.
Why did you know there was a lot of waste, fraud, and abuse?
Well,
how were you were involved in local politics because you're politically active already? Or?
Yes, part of it is, and I guess also the roundup opened up my eyes when I was there. I'd have the sheriff coming by, and I'd have the what do you call it? The inspector, the food inspector, health inspector, the fire marshal.
Why was the sheriff coming by? Is that part of what you do when you have a bar?
Yeah, well, the sheriff would come by a lot because it was always, one or two particular individuals that would complain about noise.
I see.
And then it got to where the guy was just constantly, it was a nuisance, but the sheriff would just constantly come as well. And I would tell him, look, Sheriff, there's nothing going on here, but you're still responding and you're sending people out here.
So somebody kind of almost, they were just the word that comes in my mind is a medical word, but perseverating on it. They're perseverating on this.
Right.
Complaining the same complaint again
Right.
and again, and the sheriff is.
Right, you're just responding to it and kowtowing to it because I guess he's political and that opened up my eyes and it was like, okay, this is not how a real chief of police or sheriff or works in a regular city. You know, he's a little more objective, uses objectivity, not just goes with what his constituents are saying or trying to appease a certain audience. And I started realizing, wow, I am in a little town here, you know, and if I'm not on the inside, you know, I'm on the outside, and it's about who you know. And I started noticing that too with some of the commissioners and the city councilmen. And then it was like the same group of people that were running the show in the county and the city, and they were the ones that knew these people or were getting them elected. And no one was really uncovering.
It's like a little clique.
Yeah, a little mafia, you know. And so I decided to start using my experience in politics and knowing where to look and uncover some of these, relationships and the good old boy system, basically, and challenging it and going to commissioner's court, going to city council and challenging it. And I started really, ruffling some feathers.
So it's interesting because, so it's a little conflicted for me, right? Because we had our clinic in Kendall County, which now we consolidated to this lovely office here.
Right.
And so we moved both clinics together here in San Antonio. But, the Bernie Kendall County Sheriff's Department, I went over there and I did trainings for their officers on how to identify a mental health situation,
Right.
how to differentiate that from a drug intoxication or withdrawal. I went to some county consortium meetings about expanding services. There was a real attempt there at a collaboration. They brought in a mental health trained officer. Like, there are a lot of things that I was really pleased to see going on over there. At the same time, you're having this different experience, and I believe you.
Sure.
But I feel conflicted because I'm over there having some positive experiences with maybe some of these same people who are out there trying to help mental health patients, trying to deal when an officer goes to a call to make sure that the person, if they're sick, they get help and they don't get hurt and all of that. So
no, and I think
it can all be true.
No, absolutely, it is. It's not all bad.
Yeah.
I think all these people mean well. The point is that sometimes they lose sight of objectivity. They get influenced more by a certain group of people. They're politicians basically, and they forget that they serve all the people, not just one political party or who they like and don't like. And that was what I saw. No, they do some good things, of course, but then again, on the counter of that, we had a case where they were training and they heard a nurse practitioner who was volunteering in their active shooter training, and they hurt him pretty bad. And when
so they're doing some kind of training where they're trying to, and I heard about this because it was in the news.
Right.
They're trying to train an officer in a safe way to take down a person who's not a criminal.
Correct.
And they have a volunteer.
Correct.
And they hurt the volunteer.
And he's a nurse practitioner, so it's not like this guy's some thug, and he's making allegations about, hey, they hurt me, and he goes to the sheriff, and the sheriff says, according to the nurse practitioner, says, what can I say? You've got a hothead that as his deputy,
and doesn't say, I'm so sorry.
Right.
Thank
Say,
you
I'm
for
sorry.
your service as a volunteer.
Right. Let me look into this. It was kind of just brushed away and not and then of course it was told, well, you signed a waiver. Well, signing a waiver is one thing, but it doesn't mean you're signing your rights, your complete right. It just means you're responsible if something happens that you did out of
right.
It doesn't mean that you're free for them to hurt you
To
or
beat
do whatever,
you up or
beat you up.
whatever, slam you before.
And so, I started probing into that case, and again, ruffled a lot of feathers. There's a lot of stonewalling.
And you like ruffling feathers.
I do.
This is part of who you are.
I do, but not.
I think that's very important.
Not just to ruffle feathers. I like to ruffle the feathers of bullies or people who I think have more control over others. Just to bring them down to reality and level the playing field. And that's what I've been doing there. So back to the podcast, John Tipton felt the same way. You know, John's been there a long time, and he's like, yes, this is still a good old boy system.
And he's a person you just know around the community. You started having conversations about
politics,
the politics. And
well, we worked together to defeat a proposition for an emergency services district. That was another example that was they were trying to slip this through
the fire
department. They were trying to play it on, tell people, oh, this is for your own benefit. This is to get you professional firefighters and yada yada. And what it really was to increase our taxes, you know, and create a committee, a working group of powerful people who could control water and who could control the growth of the fire department. And we knew it. And so we uncovered it.
Because you understood the nuance of what this was. Yeah.
And so I put a lot of my own money into that, and other volunteers did to educate the public about what this really was. And we defeated it. And that's when I think.
And you said we should team up.
Yes. And I think people started realizing, wow, these guys are serious. And I don't have a personal agenda. I'm not running for office, neither is John.
But your personal agenda is that there not be corruption in the community where you live and work.
Or favoritism. Favoritism in general. And so we've been kind of like watchdogs. And so the Texas Examiner became that watchdog. And
when did y'all start?
Oh gosh, we started about maybe 4 months ago. We've already had 15 episodes.
Okay.
We've had you, of course.
And which episode was I on?
You were on number 2, I think.
That was
number 1. They were number 1 episode.
Well, I am number 1.
Yes.
It was a really nice conversation actually between me and James, who has had PTSD about mental health and access to services.
He opened up about sexual abuse that as you know, a lot of men don't talk about sexual abuse. We talk about little girls being abused. Men are abused as much, or young boys are abused as much, but we just don't talk about it. And he opened up about that, which was very powerful. I think it even had John opened up about his experience too, which surprised me. I didn't know about it.
It was the whole, I mean, honestly, it was beautiful. And it was a wonderful conversation where, and that's kind of how it is as a mental health professional, right? Is that people don't want to be secretive. They don't want to hold this stuff inside. They'll even say it with a camera. But they need a space where they feel that they won't be judged. They need somebody who gives them room, you know, to have those conversations. And I mean, for me, I have a lot of those conversations, and it's an honor to be able to be in that position with people. That was such a touching moment for me, because we're there with all the cameras, and then, you know, these 2 men are talking about their experiences, and I just it has a sacred quality. It's like you're being a priest or something, you know, somebody's gonna entrust that to you and validate that you've made it safe enough that they can have that conversation. And that's what you're trying to do.
And John's a tough dude. He used to fight pirates in Somalia and military guy. And again, it just goes to prove that we're all carrying some cross or something.
No, for sure.
And that's what I love about the Examiner. We've been bringing in people from the police chief to a defense attorney, 2 politicians running against each other, the health inspector. We had a international not drug smuggler, arms dealer, which is just as interesting on the show. And so the show's
these are the kind of people you're friends with?
Yes, acquaintances.
So okay, something I didn't ask you.
Yes.
Your education.
Oh, yes.
How do you, and what education do you need to go on?
Become a consultant? To become a consultant?
Well, so first of all, to become border patrol.
Well, back in the day in border patrol, I don't know if it still is, as long as you had a high school diploma. I had an associate's degree at that time. I think I had an associate's in criminal justice. And then I got my business degree, business administration. And then later I got my master's, but this is all.
Where did you do your education?
Well, Wayland Baptist University and UTEP, University
Okay.
of Texas El Paso.
Okay.
And all this, I was doing it while I was raising a family and transferring and working in Border Patrol, and I did it over a span of time. If I could do it over again, I'd probably finish that first. But then the education, but then again, I don't think I would have gotten in the Border Patrol if that was the case. And then, of course, you're also getting all this training from, at the FBI National Academy. You got a lot of training on psychological profiling, on crime scene investigations, social provinces, sociology, and a lot of that. I got more of that than probably any of my other formal education in business.
You got more out of the FBI Academy training?
I did more out of learning about the human mind and psychology. We did a lot of behavioral health. They have a pretty big behavioral health unit and also I did hostage negotiations. So a lot of it went hand in hand, and learning about people. And I'm still learning, obviously. I mean, it's
obviously you're taking on new challenges.
It's never ending. I find people
all over the place.
Well, I know that's, but I find people fascinating, and I think I'm all over the place because I know that I'm on a journey and it's going to end. I realize my own mortality.
You're trying to do all the things while you're still here.
In case there's nothing on the other side of it, I want to be able to do as much as I can on this side. So that's really how I process. It's like I'm always trying to learn, read new books.
And you said something to me one day, I think over coffee or something. You said part of your political, activity and your passion is you're thinking about what you're leaving behind for your grandkids.
Yes.
In this community. Your grandkids live here.
Yes.
And so you're really thinking about, like, I don't want a corrupt system. I want it to be watchdogged. I want it to be fair. I want everybody to have the same shot and not be treated differently.
And I want my grandkids to know, to not be afraid to be David, when you're fighting Goliath, and be proud of it. In fact, my grandson and I were at the Spurs game recently, and he's a LeBron James fan. That's not very popular in San Antonio, and he's rooting for LeBron, and people are booing LeBron, and he looks at me. He's 8 years old. I go, Dad, why are they booing him?
Granddad.
I said, Granddad. I said, why are they booing him? And I said, it's because he's very good. And I said, and when you're very good, people are going to try to bring you down. And I said, so you better be ready for this, because they're going to boo you too when you're in the NBA. And he got a big old smile on his face. He goes, oh, okay, good. It was a teaching moment to let him know that instead of me saying that those people were bad, I said, they're jealous.
And there's truth to that, right?
Yes.
They boo him because they want the other team to win.
Right.
And he's good.
He's good. And so it made him feel better.
For life. I bet there are people who boo you. I don't know. You're a thorn in somebody's side.
Yeah, I'm sure people boo me, but it's I wanted him to know that it's okay to be the outlier. To if you're doing what you think is right and you're supporting who you think is right, don't be afraid. Don't go and become labeled or pigeonholed.
Yeah.
Your own person.
Okay, so then, as VIP medical consulting, I have a question for you about this whole journey with the Border Patrol and whatever. What about this journey has you out there promoting Botox and fillers? Because that is the weirdest thing. I am of the view that I'm torn. The medical clinic needs to be treating disease and whatever, but at the same time, if you're going to go out and you're going to have a cosmetic procedure, it needs to be done safely. If you're doing it in some, salon without any medical professional, that could be dangerous. So, but what in your journey got you to Botox and filler? I need to know about that.
Well, that's not all I do, but one of my clients right now, Kellum Physician Partners, they're big in family medicine, and they decided to incorporate aesthetics into the program for their patients. Exactly what you said is they hire professional nurse injectors and physicians who are highly trained in doing these aesthetics procedures. Because
so that people don't get hurt.
So they don't go to somewhere else. It's not really about, hey, we want to make more money here. It's like, this is a service we offer, just like weight loss or anything else. but,
Yeah, and I know like pediatrician's office sometimes do ear piercing for the same
there
reason.
you go, right.
Right, they do that to make sure that you're not out there getting some dirty
Correct.
gun,
Right.
you know, hurting your child.
Yeah, and that's why we offer that, but
But whenever I see it, you know, I see the advertisements and stuff, and I just think, oh my gosh.
yeah,
I
because.
wonder if they're over there injecting you, like if you had some work done.
Yeah, oh, of course, yeah. Why wouldn't I? I gotta be on this podcast. I gotta
Right,
look good, right?
you gotta.
Yeah, no, but that's one of the services, many services they offer, and you really don't promote family medicine out there. You don't have to, and people will
Right,
come to see eventually. But because this is cash based, you know, the aesthetics, the weight loss is a big thing now. You can promote those legally, because there's also rules in the medical field.
yes, that's one of the rules that I think people have to be really careful about. Again, I want to be in compliance,
Right.
and you got to be really careful about what you promote.
But you can, because you're a cash-based program,
Yeah.
so you're not held by the Medicare standards necessarily, but there's also ethics. Some doctors just don't feel like it's they don't want to advertise, and that's fine. You know, I
Yeah.
have different clients, some that are more conservative and some that want to promote themselves.
Yeah.
And I ride for the brand, you know, I try to help whoever I can. And but most importantly, I try to keep in mind that I keep my client in a compliant manner, growing their practice, but doing it, you know, right.
Yeah, ethically, legally,
And
all above board.
and you guys are getting hit from every direction. You got Fast Eddie drug reps sometimes, you know, or then maybe are not that well trained, and they don't realize that they may be inadvertently getting you involved in some type of a inappropriate relationship or
Right,
some
you know,
kickback.
some of the people with the entrepreneurial spirit are out there taking risks that they may not even.
Exactly. They don't know they're breaking the law sometimes, and so yeah. So I try to make sure that
Yeah,
everything's
I have a
okay.
real radar for
I know.
the Fast Eddies. I know.
I know. A lot of them call me and ask me, "Can you get me in to see Dr. Deuter?" Good luck.
As a patient, yeah.
Yes, exactly.
She does see a lot of difficult patients. And
Right.
she would be happy to
Right.
see you for your personality
Right.
profile,
Right.
but not, no.
Yeah, no,
not
you're running a great shop. I talk about you all the time. In fact, there's a company out of Arizona that's I need to introduce you to. It's been wanting to get into the behavioral health arena in Texas, and we can talk more about that offline later. But the first person I told them was you. This was just last week, and then they said, "Okay, we want to meet her." And I said, "Yeah," and they explained your program, and they're just fascinated by it. This is a company that integrates with primary care, but they don't do urgent care.
Yeah.
But they're interested in it.
Yeah, the integration with primary care is really neat. You know, our Austin clinic is embedded in a primary care clinic. Our location is actually in the HEB Wellness Primary Care Clinic.
Wow.
So we have, you know, a relationship where we have an embedded psychiatrist who can consult with their family medicine team.
Did we work on that together initially or no?
We worked on that together initially.
Yes.
I think you wrote the initial letter for us to develop that relationship.
Great. I'm glad to hear
And
that.
it was a very well-written letter.
Thank you. You're very critical.
Well,
you have very high standards.
I think critical is not, I have high standards.
There you go.
Critical, no, high standards, yeah, very high standards.
Yes,
So,
yes.
but you know, your writing skills were very lovely.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
So, okay, we're gonna wrap it up.
Yes.
If anyone wants to reach you,
Yes.
if they want to be a guest on the Texas
Oh,
Examiner, if they want to send you the scoop on something, especially in
Absolutely.
Kendall County or in politics.
Anywhere in Texas.
In Texas, how do they reach you for that?
Well, you can call us, you can call me direct at 210-643-4300. Almost sounds like a lawyer number, right?
Right.
643-4300, easy to remember. You can also go to our website at vipmedicalconsulting.com and learn more about what we do there. And then if you do have a lead or you have a concern about an elected official or just something in general in your area, contact us at the Texas Examiner. We're all over Facebook, we're on YouTube, or you can contact me at that number, and we'd be glad to talk to you about getting this scoop uncovered. Okay, that's great. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Thank you for putting up with me for an hour and having this interesting conversation and explaining your journey with all these different careers. Don't get and confuse everybody. I think you're just a confusing mess professionally, but thank you for coming. Thank you for being here. All right. Yep.